two more demonstrations which will bring us back to the psychoacoustic element, which I said at the beginning I think is all important. I'd like to, first of all, in this group, show you what happens when an audience becomes brainwashed. I don't know whether you're aware that lecturers very frequently brainwash their audiences. In fact, I've done it several times already this evening. What I mean is that if I want you to hear a particular effect, then I have to prepare you for it. I have to lead you up to it. If I simply just did the experiment without telling you anything at all about it, you probably wouldn't, the first time, hear the effect that I want you to hear. But by preparing you for it, by brainwashing you, as it were, I can get you to hear what I want. And I think it's justified because you've only got a short time in a lecture, you haven't time to listen to things over and over again, and provided I'm brainwashing you into hearing something that is right, and I know is there, then I think it's justified. But this will, I think, demonstrate just how powerfully this technique can work, and then I'll say why it's important in other ways. It's a record of some very, very crude synthetic speech, and it starts with the buzzing sound of the vocal cords. Well, that's the sort of buzzing you would get for a sentence. Of course, that's a sentence which is being said all on one note. You know, it's frightfully dull, but you can understand it perfectly well, although it's not very interesting. It's that kind of speech. It was on one note. Well, now the next thing you have to do is to make s and ch sounds, and you do that by taking white noise, remember we had that at the beginning, and you chop it up into little bits, and it sounds like this. Now we'll add those two together. Well, we're still a long way from real speech. The next thing you have to do is to put in the effect of all the cavities in the nose and throat. And some of those, of course, are what determines that it's my voice rather than your voice. Some of them are what determines the vowel sound. And we have some control over those. And there are really 4 frequency regions which we have to get right if we want to get a vowel to sound right. And if those frequencies are all bunched together, we get a sort of R sound. If they're split into two, too high and too low, we get an E sort of sound. And depending on where we put them, so we get our different vowel sounds. Well, now in this recording, we didn't put all the 4 regions in, we only put 1. So it's very, very crude, and I don't think you will understand what is being said, but let's just try. Well, you can probably tell that it's speech, and if you've heard it before, you may even know what it is, but I doubt whether you would otherwise. Now I'm going to do the brainwashing bit. I'm going to tell you what the recording said. What it said was, sounds of music can be used for the synthesis of speech. Sounds of music can be used for the synthesis of speech. Now I'm going to play exactly the same recording again. Sounds of music can be used for the synthesis of speech. Well, I hope that convinced you that brainwashing is a powerful tool. And you see, what I've done now, I hope you don't object, but I've actually changed you. You're not the audience that came in. When you came in, you were an audience that hadn't heard that. Now you're an audience that has heard it, and so your response is different. And this really focuses attention on one of the big problems in psychoacoustics, psychophysics. Every time you do an experiment, you change the person who is your victim. And I suppose what we would really like is tens of thousands of clones of identical people, so we could use them for one experiment and then throw them away. And then, of course, we would be sure that we had an untarnished individual each time. But of course you can't do that, and you have to make allowances. You have to keep disguising the experiment and coming at it in all sorts of different ways in order to get the effect you want. But of course, if it wasn't for this ability of the brain to do that, we wouldn't be able to exist. That's how we learn to speak. That's how we learn to adapt to circumstances. I'm sure you've all had a visitor from overseas whose native language isn't English, and the first day you think, oh dear, I'm never going to get by, I can't really understand him very well. And then on the third day you say, by Jove, your English has improved. But of course it isn't his English that's improved at all. You have become brainwashed, you have become tuned in. And in fact, if instead of telling you what was on that record, I'd played the same record to you about 5 or 6 times, you would have understood it. You would gradually have picked up a word at a time, you would have recognized a word, and then gradually built it up. I don't know whether you've ever heard a pilot talking to the control tower, and you wonder how on earth any plane ever landed, because the speech is so garbled. But of course the pilot is brainwashed. He knows what words he's listening for, and he's heard them before on that very restricted system. So it's all right. And as I say, all the time, all the days of our lives really, we are continually using this ability, and whenever you hear a sound, the first thing the brain does is to sort of flip through the memory banks to find whether we've heard that one before. And another of the clues to the reason why we can separate out the violins from the oboes and so on in the orchestra is that we've heard them all before separately. And so we have stored in our brains the necessary clues which help us to separate them out.